Good evening, everyone. I am Metro Board member Stephanie Gidigbi-Jenkins, and I represent the District of Columbia on the Metro Board of Directors. Welcome to the second of 4 virtual public hearings on Metro's proposed fiscal year FY22 budget. This hearing is convened by the Metro Board of Directors to gather comment on 2 dockets. Docket B21-01 on Metro's proposed FY2022 and 2027 capital improvement program and strategic plan, and docket B21-02 on Metro's proposed FY2022 operating budget and related service and fare proposals and changes to parking rates at some Prince George's County stations. Notice of this hearing was made by publication in the Washington Post, and ads were placed in the Afro, Utrecht, Dinai, El Tiempo Latino, the Epic Times, the Iran Times, the Korean Times, and the Washington Hispanic, as well as through social media and radio. And signs were placed in all rail stations, on buses, Metro access vehicles, at Metro bus info centers, and over 300 bus stops. Since we're doing this hearing virtually, the hearing is going to look and feel a little different than our usual in-person hearings. We would normally have a presentation from our Chief Financial Officer, but in order to get right to your comments and testimony, we have instead posted a video at wamada.com/budget that provides an overview of next year's proposed budgets. In short, Metro is proposing to maintain operations and increase service to meet demands through December 2021, with the need for severe service reductions beginning in 2022 without additional federal funding. However, this weekend, the Senate passed another COVID relief bill. While this bill still needs to be approved by the House and signed by the President, and it will take some time to calculate exactly how much funding Metro will receive, we are encouraged that a significant amount of relief for transit is expected to be included in the final bill. This will help us minimize service reductions in FY22. We'd like to thank our congressional delegation for championing these issues with us in addition to the region. We will likely be able to avoid the worst of the service cuts that were on the table when we took this budget proposal out to the public. With that bit of good news, I'd like to turn to the portion of this evening where we will hear from speakers. Those of you wishing to provide testimony should call 512-580-8850. I will repeat, 512-580-8850. After calling in, you will need to enter a 4-digit meeting code. For this evening's meeting, the code is 3811. Again, that's 3811. Once you're in the meeting, you will be able to listen over the phone by pressing *1. If you'd like to provide testimony, you can press *3, and you'll be put in a speaker's queue. You'll get a message when it is your turn to speak. For those of you on the line now, if you want to speak, go ahead and press *3 to get in the queue. If you're watching the live stream on a different device, please make sure to mute the device so that there isn't feedback. You'll be able to listen to the hearing while you wait on the phone queue. If you would like to provide oral testimony, but aren't able to wait until you come up in the queue, you can press *2 to leave a voicemail. Your voicemail will be transcribed and included in the hearing recording. In order for the public record to accurately reflect who's providing the testimony, I'd ask that you please state your name and any organization you represent before beginning your testimony. Elected officials will be allowed 5 minutes, and non-electeds or anyone else will be allowed 3 minutes. Extra time will be given for translation if needed. We ask that you stay within your time limit because we want to make sure everyone who wants to speak has a chance to be heard. I also want to note that each speaker is able to speak once at each hearing. While you may have the option to rejoin the speaker's queue, please note that we cannot accept additional testimony at this hearing. I want to take a moment to recognize that this is where we listen to you. This is your opportunity to comment on the proposals, and we are here to listen. We will not be able to answer questions during your testimony. Before you begin your remarks, please state your name and the organization you represent, if any. Please note that all statements, including any personal information such as name, email address, mailing address, or telephone number you provide in the statement are releasable to the public upon request and may be posted on WMATA's website without change, including any personal information provided. Further, testimony may be submitted and must be received by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, March 16th. Testimony can be completed online at wmata.com/budget. Online, you have the options to do 3 things: complete a survey, write a free-form comment, and upload a letter, petition, and/or other documents. You can also mail testimony to Office of the Secretary, WMATA, 600 5th Street Northwest, Washington, D.C. 20001. Again, all testimony must be received by 5 p.m. on March 16th. Due to the pandemic and the slowdown in mail service, we encourage everyone to submit comments online if possible. Your comments will be part of the public record that will be reviewed by the Board of Directors. Changes to the options presented here tonight may be proposed in response to testimony received and subsequent staff analysis. And now it's time to call the first witness. As a reminder, please tell us your name and any organization you represent before you start speaking. Staff will then unmute the speaker from the speaker queue.
Hello, my name is Rico Dancy. I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm the president of the Black Lives Matter for the Deaf chapter. And the reason why disabled people have monthly pay, we live on a fixed income, typically given by the state. We live on a very limited fixed income. So we have limited money for travel. So I'm curious if people who collect Social Security or Social Security disability insurance who are on a monthly budget, why don't we have a more stable cost for transportation? I was just curious about that. And that's the only comment that I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rico Dancy. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Take care.
Hi, this is Michael Golash. I'm a Ward 4 resident, I'm a former employee of the Transit Authority and a member of ATU, Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 689. I'm opposed to all the cuts in Metro service. The numbers of individual trips that people have been taking has decreased. The number of trips have taken, but the number of people that riding the transit system, I think, is more or less the same. It's just that people, instead of going to work 5 days a week, are only going 1 day a week. But they still want to get to work in a timely fashion. They don't want to have to wait half an hour for a train and then take 45 minutes to an hour to get to work. That will only discourage people from continuing riding the transit system. So an alternative is to simply reduce the size of the trains. In other words, have 2-car trains, have 4-car trains, have 6-car trains. You don't have to run all 8-car trains when you have a reduced ridership. That will save some money, but of course, you'll still have to have the same number of drivers and you'll prevent any layoffs. The second thing about saving money is Metro is simply transferring costs. In other words, instead of Metro paying its train operators, now the DC government will pay them unemployment insurance and will pay for their health insurance through Medicaid. So Metro saves some money, but it winds up costing the DC government money. It's better just to have the DC government give Metro more money to continue the current level of service and the current level of employment. I'd also like to say that many of Metro's policies in terms of cutting service affect the most vulnerable people in our community. African-American workers, Hispanic workers who are really dependent upon the transit system to get them to work in a timely fashion. When you cut back trains and cut back bus service, you inevitably create a lot of harm for people who don't have easy access to automobiles or more expensive modes of transportation. So the system is very, very important to many, many people in this region. And Metro often claims to be involved in the struggle against racism. Well, let's put your money where your words are. So the other question, of course, is where is the money going to come from? Well, one, the local government should put more money in. That means the businesses and the developers, some who've literally become billionaires over the last 5, 10, 15 years because of the services Metro provides, they don't pay their fair share for the services that Metro provides them. That issue has to be addressed. Second of all, the federal government, separate from the question of stimulus money, should provide a subsidy for Metro for a payment for the services we provide for this region. They give their employees a pass to ride the trains a certain number of times, but that pass does not account for the actual cost of the train service. So Metro should demand the federal government pay for the difference between the real cost of providing the service and the money that's provided on the trip passes or rider passes they provide to federal employees. So I think that in summary, the issue of racism is extremely central to this whole discussion. If we are truly trying to build an anti-racist movement in this country, dealing with issues of public transportation in a fair and equitable way is central to that focus. To threaten a predominantly African-American workforce with the loss of jobs and benefits is a serious racist maneuver, which we should take every effort that we have to try and stop that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Golash. Appreciate your comments. Next caller.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Can you introduce yourself?
Good. Yes, my name is Abby and I live in Fairfax County. I want to call in to strongly oppose the measures that WMATA is thinking of taking as well. We already had a Metro bus service reduced in the Annandale community in the past. So seeing this was really eye-opening that WMATA is not really caring about the passengers that they have, all over the DMV area. I work in DC, so I rely on the Metro heavily to get to work. And if things were different during these times and there wasn't the coronavirus pandemic going on, I would still continue to be taking the Metro. But of course, now I can't. So these proposed changes would really affect for me getting to work and also a lot of my peers as well. And by reducing service, you will be forcing you will be forcing a lot of people to, find another mode of transportation or use their cars again. And I don't think that's a good idea because there's already enough traffic and a lot of accidents in DC going on right now. So adding more people on the road doesn't seem like a very positive change, especially with all the environmental stuff going on as well. Using cars, it's just not, the best for our environment. So I just wanted to call in to strongly oppose that. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Next caller.
Good evening. My name is Jan Smart. I live in Foxhole Village, and I'm calling in on behalf of the Foxhole Community Citizens Association. We have a number of concerns on the D6 bus route. This is a bus route that starts off in Ward 8 and ends up in Ward 3. It passes 3 hospitals, GW, MedStar Georgetown, and Sibley. Workers' shifts start and end very early and very late, and those workers need access to get from Ward 8 across to Ward 3 without having to change or hope that there might be a bus somewhere. There are also very many students who commute to Duke Ellington, Georgetown University, Washington International School, Georgetown Day, Hardy, Wilson, and other schools in Ward 3. And now the district is talking about adding to another school on the Hardy campus. There are also students who live on the campus at GW's Mount Vernon, and they would have no access to food stores or anything at all. There's also the M4 bus, which goes to Wilson and Tenleytown, and that would mean that all of the students who currently commute from across Ward 3 would have no way to get to their school. There's another issue here regarding low-income housing in Ward 3. I know that there's been some attempt to integrate more affordable housing in Ward 3. If you look at MacArthur Boulevard below the Georgetown Reservoir, there's a number of affordable buildings that the D6 services. Many of those people would have no private cars or other ways to get into the city or to their jobs elsewhere. So basically, this would cut off access both for health at the 3 hospitals and for jobs at the 3 hospitals for people who are in greatest need, those living in Ward 8. And of course, it would also affect all of the people who live in the Palisades and Foxhole Village who commute to Washington, D.C. on their jobs when their jobs open back up again. We strongly protest that you eliminate D6 or M4. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Next caller.
Hi, my name is Gabby Morris Flores. I'm a lifelong resident of the DC metro area and a member of Sunrise DC, a local community organization that is part of the climate justice movement. I grew up in Rockville, Maryland, and I currently live in Petworth, and I've relied on the DC metro system my whole life. I am completely appalled and horrified by the cuts to the metro system proposed by WMATA. These cuts will most affect the people that the DC government claims that they want to protect. They will disproportionately affect low-income communities, senior citizens, disabled people, DC students, essential workers, and Latino and Black communities in the DMV. And for this reason, I firmly oppose these cuts. The cost of living in DC is so high that it is more affordable for many low-income essential workers to work in DC and live in the suburbs of Maryland. These cuts will severely impact these essential workers, including those who live in the low to moderate income housing surrounding the Grosvenor Metro Station, where I grew up, which the Grosvenor Metro Station is one of the stations slated to be shut down. People chose to move into these neighborhoods specifically because they were walking distance of a metro station, and now they will be stranded from the public transportation that they relied on. Similarly, affordable housing units in DC and Maryland are built with accessibility to public transportation in mind. I work in the affordable housing sector, and I know that it's required for new affordable housing projects in DC to be built within half a mile from public transportation service. This is required so These residents have the mobility to reach critical services that everyone needs access to, like food and medical care. And WMATA is proposing to close the Mount Vernon Square Metro Station, which will eliminate Metro access for the people living in 766 affordable housing units, affecting low-income, elderly, and disabled residents. Beyond the inequities that these cuts would exacerbate, the cuts are also financially and environmentally unsound on a macro scale. These cuts are being proposed because low ridership caused by the pandemic has created a revenue shortfall. However, further service cuts will only result in a declining spiral of ridership and revenue that will leave Metro in an even more difficult position. The elimination of stations and bus lines and the increased wait times for workers, residents, and students needing to commute will push those who are able to seek other methods of transportation. Cuts will encourage the use of personal or for-hire vehicles, and thus WMATA will bring in even less revenue. For a metro system that relies so heavily on passenger fares to fund its operation budget, cutting service is a death sentence. And for a city that has pretty lofty climate goals of vowing to cut emissions by half by 2032, decimating its metro system does not make any sense. Ms. Gidigbi, I know that you work for NRDC and are committed to addressing the climate crisis and doing so in an equitable way. A robust public transportation system is critical to any equitable climate plan, and I know for a fact that it's a part of DC's Clean Energy Amendment Act of 2018. Cutting service will only decrease future ridership, disproportionately impact marginalized communities, and leave DC in a precarious position in regards to its climate commitments. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Gabby. Next caller.
Yes, hi, this is Zachary Israel. I'm an elected advisory neighborhood commissioner for single member district 4D04 in the District of Columbia, representing parts of Petworth and Brightwood Park in Ward 4. I would like to read part of the resolution that ANC 4D passed unanimously on January 27th, 2021, regarding WMATA's proposed bus cuts and changes for fiscal year 2022, with a specific focus on the proposed elimination of the 62 and 63 bus routes, beginning on January 1st, 2022. And this is especially in light of the fact that, according to Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, WMATA should receive an estimated $1.4 billion from the upcoming COVID relief law, of the $30 billion that will be going to public transit. So WMATA is getting a lot of money in the next weeks and months, and it should use some of that money to save the 62 and 63 bus routes. So this is part of the resolution that we passed in January. Whereas the location of the Ward 4 short-term family housing facility at 5505 5th Street Northwest, which first opened in September 2018, was specifically chosen in part along the Route 62-63 bus corridor to allow working parents, the vast majority of whom do not have cars, to utilize the affordable 62 and 63 bus routes to get to and from work, including transferring at the Tacoma and Georgia Avenue Petworth Metro Rail stations, and to take their children to and from the facility to other parts of the DC metro region, whereas the 62 and 63 bus routes provide essential transportation for many Advisory Neighborhood Commission 4D residents who commute to and from jobs near Tacoma, Brightwood, Brightwood Park, Petworth, Columbia Heights, Parkview, Shaw, Logan Circle, Penn Quarter, and Federal Triangle, and parents who rely on these bus routes to drop their children off at daycare would be adversely impacted by these cuts. Whereas students who utilize the 62 and 63 bus routes to get to and from school will be adversely impacted by these proposed cuts, given that in-person instruction will very likely be back to normal during fiscal year 2022. Whereas the 62 and 63 bus routes offer a safe and economical way ANC 4D residents to get to and from home late at night and early in the morning, whereas the fiscal year 2022 proposed Metrobus Consolidated Route Network Service Plan utilizes an equity essential travel criterion, which is supposed to take into account the low income who rely on Metro for essential travel to groceries, medical appointments, and daily necessities, and also support access to jobs and healthcare at hospitals and in other sectors. And yet this very criterion ignores the very group of people who will be adversely impacted by the elimination of the 62 and 63 bus routes. Whereas WMATA's final framework for transit equity, Metrobus service guidelines, publicly unveiled in December 2020, and based on data from July 2019 to February 2020, indicates that routes 62 and 63 meet the proposed service guidelines, including availability, route design, reliability, comfort, productivity, and cost effectiveness. Whereas WMATA should take into consideration estimated ridership demand levels during fiscal year 2022, when the COVID pandemic will be coming to an end and many more ANC 4D residents will return to work in person, significantly increasing ridership on the 62 and 63 bus lines. Whereas climate change poses an existential threat to the planet, and automobile emissions are on the one of the main sources of greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change, whereas DC residents use mass transit as a critical way to reduce automobile traffic and emissions, and whereas DC's comprehensive plan calls for providing more commuting alternatives besides personal vehicles, therefore be it resolved that ANC 4D opposes WMATA's proposed cuts to the 62 and 63 bus lines in fiscal year 2022 and urges WMATA to preserve the 62 and 63 bus routes on weekdays and weekends for the entirety of fiscal year 2022. Again, I would just mention that this resolution passed unanimously by ANC 4D on January 27th, 2021. Our ANC represents over 12,000 residents in Ward 4, many of whom really rely on these two bus routes. And so again, I just urge the WMATA Board of Directors in the coming weeks and months to save these two bus lines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Israel, for your comments. Next speaker.
I'm Ann Mladinov. I'm a commissioner in ANC3B Clover Park, Cathedral Heights. Our area is heavily dependent on Metrobus because we don't have Metro Rail service, and we also have a densely settled neighborhood of apartments and row houses, about 300 people per bus stop, with quite a few senior zero-car households and about 13% individuals at the poverty level. We are, like many neighborhoods around the district, who really need and depend on bus service to get people to work and school and other activities, avert congestion, and meet environmental goals. Metro Rail may be the premier transit service, but buses are the workhorses. Metro buses had about 50% of normal ridership in the pandemic, while Metro Rail is down to only about 10%. That's because so many essential workers ride the bus and need the bus. We'll be watching to see if the new COVID relief bill has enough money to cover key WMATA services, but I know the planning team and the board do not want to see reductions in service any more than customers do. We need the system to maintain services and expand operations as riders return. Keep the buses going. Make sure you get the word out that you're taking all steps necessary to make sure transit riders are safe and you have enough service for customers to return. Beyond those general points, I want to mention specifically the routes my area needs. I also underline the importance of service to neighborhoods like ours, not downtown, but toward the edges, up the hills with a lot of narrow residential streets winding around and up and down. It's not the best territory for buses to operate, especially in winter weather, but that's where tens of thousands of your customers live. Look at Marshall Heights, Congress Heights, Benning Heights, Fort Lincoln, all the heights. Like Knollwood, Palisades, Cathedral Heights, and Glover Park, our routes are on the list year after year for reductions when the budget is squeezed. All these neighborhoods have grown and been able to thrive partly because they have transit service. Please do not turn your back on this fundamental part of your base. The Metro bus is the lifeblood of the community. The trunk of the transit system will be weaker if you cut off the arms. In our ANC, we've seen major reductions in service over the past few years, and of course also during this year due to the virus. Several routes were eliminated totally, including peak hour service on the D1 and the 37. We are supporting and looking for continuing service on the D1 and D2, the N2, N4, and N6, and the 30 bus series, including the 30N and 30S. The current proposal for the second half of FY22 would cut out all the bus service on the D2 serving the interior of Glover Park, west or southwest of Tunlaw, and leave 25% of the riders on that route without any bus service at their stops. That all-day service is essential to the community. It's just barely getting back to 7-day service this month. The D1 peak hour weekday service has been discontinued, but WMATA says it will start D1 again if the number of riders on D2 gets beyond safe limits. We need those buses. We hope those routes can both be continued through FY2022. Riders in Cathedral Heights and further northwest also depend on the N buses on Mass Ave west of DuPont Circle. The only service right now is the N6, which previously operated only in evenings and on weekends. The proposed budget would retain just the N6, but for the second half of FY2022 would combine that one remaining N line with the D2 and M4, leaving the vital Mass Ave corridor with basically no bus service. Of the nearly 4,000 weekday riders on the N buses pre-COVID, that proposal will leave 39% without any service at the bus stops they use. The other key routes are the 30 line buses on Wisconsin Avenue, including the 30N and 30S cross town between Friendship Heights and Naylor Road or Southern Avenue. That route got more comments a year ago about saving the service than any other route that I saw. It's a mainstay for many essential workers riding in early morning or going home late at night. People who currently use the crosstown ride would have to transfer at the National Mall, adding time and inconvenience. It looks like about 20 people per bus at peak hour might have to make that transfer. It just doesn't make sense. Please think about the people relying on those buses for late hours, early hours. Their trip is already nearly an hour. Those employees really need that service. It's just as important today as it was in the 1970s when WMATA made a commitment to keep up the crosstown service and connections between distant parts of the city, even if there are alternate services on Metro Rail. Equity, diversity, and inclusion demand that we pay attention to maintaining those services. If WMATA is going to cut back or restructure, we ask you to please include community leaders and residents in your assessments. Your passenger base wants to work with you to find the good ideas, choose lines where people live and work and go to school and stores, and tie them together in a way that works for the people who need to ride. Where businesses and schools are reopening, who is riding, who wants to ride, who could be attracted to use our services. This is a time when we have to be really informed and smart because we can't afford to lose the value of the system this region has developed and nurtured and supported. We have to be able to get the best use out of our investments, give people good alternatives to turning to private motor vehicles, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and keep up the quality of life. Our environmental policy, transportation policy, and economic policy all depend on a healthy, safe, efficient, and well-used public transportation system.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. I'd also like to take this time to acknowledge WMATA Board Chair, Paul Smedberg, who's on the line. And we will take the next, from Virginia. And we will now take the next caller.
Good evening. My name is Christian Damiana, and I am the Commissioner for ANC Single Member District 3D07. I have been designated to testify to WMATA on behalf of ANC 3D about our many concerns regarding the proposed budget for fiscal year 22. On March 3rd, ANC 3D unanimously passed a resolution opposing the proposed service reductions to Metrobus routes within our jurisdiction. We urged WMATA to reconsider its plans and find a way to maintain public transit and expand it within our commission's boundaries and across the district. If you've not yet reviewed our resolution, we hope you will do so soon. Our ANC includes the neighborhoods of Palisades, Foxhall Village, Spring Valley, Wesley Heights, and American University. And residents in all of these areas rely heavily on Metrobus service to get to school, work, medical appointments, and more. We're extraordinarily concerned by the proposed elimination of the D6, M4, N2, and N4 routes. If WMATA follows through with the cuts, there will be a devastating impact on our community. Because there are no Metro Rail stations in our jurisdiction, it is absolutely imperative that access to these key Metrobus routes is preserved as we approach a gradual return to pre-pandemic life. Put another way, Metrobus is effectively the only public transportation option available to us and our constituents. We fear that if Metrobus service in our neighborhoods is slashed as proposed, we will see many residents abandon public transit and choose to rely on personal cars or rideshare services instead. Although WMATA has identified alternative service that users of eliminated or reduced Metrobus lines can use, we note that the proposed cuts will leave large swaths of our community without any Metrobus service in 2022. According to WMATA's own analysis, the alternative service options will also be highly disruptive for riders of the Metrobus routes, as many will be forced to travel to different bus stops in order to access a functioning bus route. We believe that the proposed Metrobus service reductions would surely exacerbate traffic, lead to increased carbon emissions, and reverse the positive commuter adaptation towards public transit that we've seen in recent years. Our concerns are not just about increased congestion, though. The proposed elimination of these routes will lead to massive transportation inequity, something that is already a major issue within our community. These cuts will disproportionately impact a variety of key constituencies like students, the elderly, and late night and early morning commuters. ANC 3D urges WMATA to prioritize Metro bus service to routes that serve these communities, as well as to those which serve essential facilities and institutions. The D6 route, in particular, plays a unique role in getting essential workers to their jobs at Sibley and Georgetown hospitals, as well as schools like Key, Hardy, and Duke Ellington. The current D6 route going to MacArthur also allows for multifamily, relatively affordable housing below the Georgetown Reservoir. This advances priority initiatives for integrating affordable housing in Ward 3. The proposed route alterations would leave this large swath of mixed-income, car-less residents unserved by public transportation and unnecessarily complicate a priority initiative for DC and the region. After the D6 route is eliminated, bus service will not exist and will not be replaced by alternative routes on MacArthur Boulevard, on Foxhall Road, and at MedStar Georgetown University Hospital. Also, after this elimination, residents in the Palisades and Foxhall Village will no longer be able to directly access Georgetown by public transportation. After the M4 and N2 routes are eliminated, there will be no Metro bus service on Nebraska Avenue. And after the N6 route is changed, residents will no longer be able to use Mass Ave to reach bus stops in the core of the district's business district. It's clear that the proposed service reductions will devastate the individuals in our community that rely on public transportation the most. Accordingly, ANC 3D opposes the proposed cuts to the D5, D6, N2, N4, and M4 routes. Furthermore, ANC 3D urges WMATA to adopt a budget for fiscal year 2022 that aims to maintain and expand public transit within the boundaries of ANC 3D and across the district. WMATA's revised FY22 proposed operating budget undoubtedly fails to accomplish this goal at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder, for those who wish to provide testimony, you should call 512-580-8850. Again, that's 512-580-8850. After calling in, you will need to enter a 4-digit meeting code. For this evening's meeting, the code is 3811. Again, that's 3811. Once you are in the meeting, you will be able to listen over the phone by pressing *1. If you'd like to provide testimony, you can press *3 and you'll be put in the speaker's queue. You'll get a message when it is your time to speak. For those of you on the line now, if you want to speak, go ahead and press *3 to get in the queue. We will now have our next speaker.
Hi, I am calling in from the District of Columbia. My name is Brooke Pinto. I'm the council member representing Ward 2 on the DC Council. And thank you for hosting this opportunity tonight to hear from the community. I think it's been very clear from everyone we've heard from about major concerns for the proposed cuts. I too am deeply concerned about the vast proposed cuts to WMATA train and bus service across the city. Ward 2 is the geographic center of our city, and not only do thousands of residents live in the neighborhoods and rely upon these bus routes, but many more students and professionals attending public school, colleges, or otherwise pursuing an advanced degree or professional development within Ward 2. And a large portion of residents from across the District of Columbia, as well as Maryland and Virginia, utilize metro stations and bus routes to get to work each day. These individuals work in our local and federal governments, in our retail and dining establishments, work in our hotels, in our entertainment, cultural, and tourism venues. And they breathe necessary life into our vibrant local economy and help to make the District of Columbia the melting pot we know it to be, and we know is crucial to our recovery moving forward. Plainly stated, WMATA's service and full service helps to make our neighborhoods more livable, education more attainable, and it helps to get us to work more easily. It helps prop up our local economy. While I understand WMATA is currently facing major budget constraints due to low ridership during the pandemic, I know it would be a dire mistake to significantly cut our bus lines and close transit stations. With a third COVID-19 vaccination approved, a flood of innovative ideas that are allowing to keep our small businesses open and residents and visitors safe, and the return to in-person learning for more students throughout the city, we are very hopeful that we are indeed beginning to get the pandemic under control and there is light at the end of this tunnel. We must not forget that while many ride Metro and Metrobus for convenience, many individuals and neighbors rely on these services for extremely important affairs like arriving at medical appointments on time and getting to work. And as a city, we must be committed to not only increasing equitable transportation, but also with the concerns about the environment and continuing to significantly reduce our carbon emissions as we face the climate crisis. We know that when we make public transportation more reliable and easier to use, more people opt to use it rather than their personal cars. And when this happens, our streets are safer for pedestrians and bikers, and our air quality improves. While we are lucky to live in a city with a metro rail system, many of our neighborhoods are left out and therefore rely completely on bus service to get around. I'm deeply concerned that cuts in these neighborhoods, like in Georgetown, will make those areas more car congested and less accessible to all district residents. In Georgetown, the 30N, 30S, 37, D1, D2, D5, D6, G2, and 38 will all be eliminated under the proposed cuts. And respectfully, it's really difficult to comprehend how WMATA could have come to this decision. Many of the routes that are not cut altogether will be significantly shortened and require riders to transfer buses. In some cases, cuts require riders to transfer from WMATA buses to other transportation services altogether, like the Kennedy Center shuttle or the circulator. And the barriers that this creates for riders is unacceptable. It makes it more difficult for students to travel safely to school across the city and for workers to get to work. So lastly, the district is about to receive $2.2 billion in federal funding, and I expect us to receive additional support in President Biden's next infrastructure bill. I strongly encourage WMATA to reconsider these cuts until we are fully able to understand available funding for fiscal year 2022. We should be aggressively expanding public transportation options, not cutting them. And I pledge, as the council member representing Ward 2, to work to help supply and identify additional funding to support WMATA. And I hope that you will revisit your plans moving forward so that we do not cut these important service lines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Pinto, for your remarks and for your participation. Next caller.
Hi, yes. My name is Salvador Saucedo Guzman. I'm a commissioner of ANC 5D, specifically SND 5D02. I am an advocate for the residents of Trinidad, Mount Olivet, and Ivy City, and would like to share these words as a testimony requesting to keep public transportation available for the many hardworking men and women that live in my neighborhood. The D4 and D8 bus lines are essential methods of transportation for the working people in the Mount Olivet area, and its entire elimination is a slap in the face to what many consider our home as the last stand against poverty and gentrification. Due to the current pandemic, we understand that ridership demand has been low and the cost to keep our buses running has been high. This, however, is not an excuse to take away forms of attaining equity amongst those needing to work. My home is primarily low income, and we need bus services to work. A majority of us still are essential workers and do not have the privilege to stay home and work remotely. Many of us depend on the bus service to get around the district, whether it's cleaning offices downtown or having to get to Sibley or Washington Hospital Center. Currently, no other alternatives exist within the Mount Olivet area, and removing our last method of public transportation completely creates an acceleration of poverty as it costs to get to where you need to go. And with those rises in costs, some people will be out of jobs and need to move out of the area. Budget actions such as these makes it seem like that WMATA is intentionally trying to make it harder for the working poor. As a Latino elected official in Washington D.C., I know I have to speak on part of this, just being someone that understands that we represent a large portion of essential workers in and around the city. We ride these buses every day, and I ask that you all do not eliminate these bus routes, as it will dangerously affect my community and those around me. With no transportation means no jobs, and with no jobs means no food on the table. The Mount Olive area is full of good and hardworking people that cannot afford these eliminations of public services. The budget cuts will negatively impact our community and make it more difficult for us than it already is. Thank you for allowing me to share these words.
Thank you, Commissioner Guzman. Next caller.
Hi, this is Council Member Janice Lewis-George for Ward 4. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well. Thank you, Councilwoman. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about the impact of WMATA's proposed budget on my community in Ward 4 and the DC region as a whole. The proposals to reduce, merge, or altogether eliminate many bus lines that serve our community are alarming and pose some equity issues. Our office has heard from countless constituents and stakeholders about the risks posed by these changes. These risks include making it harder for students to get to school, limiting access to childcare, medical care, and other services, cutting off customers from local businesses, compromising accessibility for residents with limited mobility, especially Ward 4's large population of seniors, increasing reliance on cars and thus contributing to climate change, and making it harder, longer, and more expensive for workers to commute to their workplace. I urge WMATA to preserve the 62 and 63 bus routes that provide essential transportation from Tacoma and several Ward 4 neighborhoods all the way down to Federal Triangle. The proposed alternative route would significantly reduce the frequency of transit options and force many Ward 4 residents to walk more than half a mile further for the same commute. Eliminating the 62 and 63 lines would also isolate families in short-term family housing facilities on 5th and Kennedy Street Northwest from public transit. I also urge the board to preserve the M4 bus, which is a key mode of transit for a huge number of Ward 4 students at Allensdale Middle School and Woodrow Wilson High School, as well as several other schools west of Rock Creek Park. While M4 ridership has been low during virtual learning, we expect it to surge back to its pre-pandemic heights and continue to grow as enrollment at these schools continue to increase. In addition, I encourage you to stop the elimination of the 59 express bus and reductions in service along the S2 and S9 bus lines that move across the heart of our city. These routes were overcrowded before COVID and will become even more packed and slower moving when we return to pre-pandemic normal without the same capacity or limited stop service. I also want to register our concerns about the proposed service reductions or elimination for the K2 line that connects Tacoma to Fort Totten, the F1, F2, and R1 bus lines that link the district with our neighbors in Prince George's County, and the H8, 60, and 64 bus lines that serve residents in the eastern part of Ward 4, which is already underserved by public transit. On a positive note, I am pleased that WMATA plans to sustain the E4, 52, and 54 bus lines at current levels, and I am also grateful for the return of late night service for the 70 and 79 bus routes along Georgia Avenue, a critical corridor for hospitality businesses whose workers and customers rely on late night service to make it home safely. I want to highlight the detrimental impact of WMATA's proposal to rail service starting in January. Closing Metro at 9 would be devastating for businesses that are already struggling and would leave countless workers stranded at the end of their workday. Meanwhile, the drastically reduced frequency in trains could discourage even the most loyal riders from using Metro. Lastly, the proposed closure of 22 Metro stations across the region would be harmful for our communities. Metro is successful when its services are reliable, convenient, and meet the needs of our residents, these proposed changes undermine those goals. In addition, I'm troubled that this budget would lead to layoffs for more than 2,500 of WMATA's devoted employees who provide rail and bus services. These layoffs would be catastrophic for workers and their families. Because the layoffs are scheduled to go into effect in January 2022, these massive job losses would also have a painful ripple effect across the DC region, further strain our unemployment benefits system, and threaten our economic recovery. The good news is that these sweeping service reductions and layoffs can be avoided. The American Rescue Plan is expected to deliver $1.4 billion in federal aid to WMATA to sustain public transit in our region. These funds are in addition to the more than $1.5 billion WMATA received from the last two stimulus packages. This is a time to deepen our commitment to managed transit so we can ensure that Metrobus and Metro Rail are a key component of the long-term future of our region. Despite the obstacles we face, I believe that WMATA can finalize a budget that does right by its riders, workers, our community, and our climate. Thank you for the chance to voice these concerns.
Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman Janice Lewis George, for your comments and your feedback. Next caller. Next caller.
Hello, I am Judy Floyd, ANC Commissioner for 1B06, which is the area around Cardoza School in Ward 1. Professionally, I've been a licensed tour guide in Washington, D.C. for the last 18 years. This evening, I'm concerned about two issues. First, I address the thought of even closing Arlington National Cemetery's Metro stop. The cemetery is our nation's most sacred ground, honoring our nation's heroes and historical figures. Arlington National Cemetery is a major tourist site and not easily accessible from other Metro stops. What more? There's no bus service to the cemetery. Closing Arlington National Cemetery stop based solely upon passenger count is just simply silly. The stop is closed in the evening. What more? In the morning, the cemetery does not open until 8 a.m., further skewing the rider statistics. Think about this. A tourist who gets off in Roslyn would have to walk an unmarked uphill route through urban streets, cross the Iwo Jima Memorial, the Netherland Carillons, then enter the cemetery at the North Gate. From there, it's an uphill walk with steps to the visitor center. The route for strollers and wheelchairs is even harder. If you came from the Pentagon Metro stop, you'd have to cross the George Washington Memorial Highway without a stoplight. Tourists who would walk from Foggy Bottom would have a long trek across the Memorial Bridge and then that maze of traffic circles. Please, let us honor our nation's most sacred ground by keeping that Metro stop open. Arlington National Cemetery Metro stop must be measured in ways beyond passenger count. The second issue I'd like to speak about is the proposed closing of the Metro trains at 9 p.m. The even thought of this sends shivers up my spines. For Washington, D.C., Memorial are a huge tourist attraction. Evening illuminated tours are very popular with tourists. The lighting is so wonderful. To make evening tours practical, tour guides need a way to get home after working these hours. And guides depend upon public transportation in the evening hours. Remember also, please, the many cleaning, maintenance, and security workers who depend upon evening transportation to make our illuminated tours work. Hardworking people who keep our city humming, and some for very modest wages. Closing Metro at 9 p.m. would be a huge hardship for tourists, for tour guides, and for worker bees alike. Surely, as our nation's capital city, we can do better. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mrs. Floyd. Next speaker.
Hello. My name is Jeffrey Rotholtz, and I'm a resident of Landover, Maryland. So my approach is a little bit different. I'm new to the area. I moved here from Woodbridge, where there's no mass transit. Mass transit is something I depend on, living in New York City all my life. And I just can't fathom, after hearing many of the speakers tonight, some of the cuts are unmanageable. We should be in a situation before the pandemic where we're expanding mass transit and buses, as well as rail. I was really looking forward to the Purple Line being built as quickly as possible, considering I wouldn't have to travel if I was looking for an employment opportunity, traveling all the way from Landover down to DC, back into some area like Silver Spring or Rockville. So that was very disappointing. People who closing the metro at 9 o'clock seems to me irrational when people are using services like going to the gym, working, the hard people that work in hospitality, and the Black and brown people and other people of limited means need mass transit and more buses. I am really shocked at this area being a major metropolitan area, not expanding mass transit. I feel that many of the people of this area, outside of DC, in Virginia and Maryland, are just selfish. And not having Metro, being, from what I've heard about the Silver Line, which should have been done a long time ago, we need more mass transit. Mass transit rail needs to be expanded to areas like Bowie, Laurel, Woodbridge, Lorton, and other areas in the DMV area. This is just with the American Rescue Bill about to be passed on Wednesday and an infrastructure bill. I really hope that these cuts need to be stopped. These are essential services and need to be expanded. With the car culture in this, which is causing economic inequity as well as climate disasters, it just seems like we need to have, it's just disappointing that more people are not speaking out about these issues. I think it's very important that we expand mass transit extensively and rather being a car culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your participation. Next speaker.
Hi there, do you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening. My name is Marissa Navarro. I'm a DC resident and a member of Sunrise DC. Although I'm not originally from DC, the one thing that has always stood out to me about this city is accessibility to transportation, which is unheard of from where I come from. I share many of the same concerns already voiced and want to emphasize the huge reliance people of color, low income, disabled, elderly, and other communities have on this public transportation system. To cut these services directly harms these communities. I want to also remind that the COVID-19 pandemic is still raging on. The health and well-being of residents do not need to be risked. With these cuts, there will be longer waits and fewer routes, leading to crowded trains and buses. This will create a greater risk for the pandemic regardless of mandated preventative measures. Essential workers like myself need to go to work every day of the week, not just Mondays through Fridays. WMATA's proposal to cut weekend rail service will prevent us from getting to our essential jobs, and we need to be there in order to make a living and to put food on our table for our families. Please consider all of these concerns put forth and do not cut the budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your participation. Next speaker.
Yes, this is Jeffrey talking again. One other thing I want to add to, some of us have disabilities, and I do not drive. So we need to get to our jobs and enjoy activities, may it be at the Arlington Cemetery, the monuments, or the museums. This is just so unfair, and I honestly feel that there is another alternative. Once again, I want to see Metro expand bus service and rail service as we become this is the 21st century, and this area is very behind in this issue. And I believe with the federal government involved, and this should not be happening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Just a reminder, for those wishing to provide testimony, you should call 512-580-8850. Again, that's 512-580-8850. After calling in, you'll need to enter a 4-digit meeting code. For this evening, the meeting code is 3811. Again, that's 3811. Once you're in the meeting, you'll be able to listen over the phone by pressing *1. If you'd like to provide testimony, you can press *3, and you'll be put in the speaker's queue. You'll get a message when it is your turn to speak. For those of you on the line now, if you want to speak, go ahead and press *3, and you'll get put into the speaker's queue. If you'd like to provide oral testimony but aren't able to wait until you come up into the queue, you can press *2 to leave a voicemail. Your voicemail will be transcribed and included in the hearing records. We'll take our next speaker.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you
Good
introduce
evening.
yourself?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Anthony Lorenzo Green. I am a advisory neighborhood commissioner for Single Member District 7C04. I'm representing part of the Deanwood community in Ward 7. And I also am a co-organizer with Black Lives Matter DC. I testify tonight in opposition to the proposed FY22 budget, in particularly the proposed elimination of the U4 bus route that runs in a loop from Deanwood to River Terrace. Of course, I have been following the COVID-19 relief, federal relief, just like everyone else. And, of course, we do see that it is moving through Congress, and that will provide some additional supports for WMATA. And, of course, there are additional negotiations in the upcoming infrastructure bill. However, we must be very intentional in not putting a budget on the table that basically throws equity out the window. Reduction of public transportation in Black and brown communities is a form of racist policy that's violent to marginalized communities. To ensure equity is at the forefront. WMATA must resist the urge to make massive cuts that will have a direct impact on our families trying their best to push through this pandemic. I am a DC native. I grew up in the Deanwood community. I have essentially rode the U4 my entire life. I am one of the people that used to hop on it just to go to the Boys and Girls Club up on Benner Road, or to hop on it just to get to the Minnesota Avenue Metro station. And many folks who've been in the Deanwood community would know that our community is known for a lot of our green spaces and our steep hills. The highest point, one of the highest points in our community is J Street. Sheriff Road is just a street over from J Street. So eliminating the U4 bus line from Sheriff Road. Sheriff Road, which has been very intentional in our community planning and having families with special needs or disabilities, our population who are veterans who have been looking for specific housing in our neighborhood. We have new units coming online at the end of this year and early next year that will have permanent supportive housing, making sure that we are doing our part as a community, that there is enough resources and amenities and transportation access point for all the growth that we are experiencing and the future growth that will come to the Deanwood community. We cannot tolerate any cuts of service in our neighborhood, especially the youth for. We cannot just move forward with a plan, of course, with hopes that federal support will prevent this from happening in the first place. But the fact that this was even thought of is what's alarming for a community that has had to fight, and it's in our history, had to fight for every bit of resource in this city, the last to get infrastructure, the last to get transportation, the last to get everything. But we are the first to stand up and say, we live here, we pay taxes, and we deserve everything that we have been contributing to the city as a whole. So it's my urging to WMATA to really focus on working with local, regional, and federal partners to increase investments in public transit. Steering clear efforts to privatize future services of WMATA, making sure that you're negotiating fairly through collective bargaining to ensure the essential workers throughout WMATA that have held us down through this pandemic are getting fair wages and benefits, and making sure that we are making a real commitment to address climate change. We should have a fully electrified bus route, and that is something that bus fleet. That is something that WMATA should be deeply investing in, and ensuring that in future years we're making the right savings from how we are expanding our public transportation options, making sure that we're improving our bus routes so that families can make the connections necessary, so they're not spending 2-3 hours just to get across town and back. This is the focus that Metro needs to be putting their attention and their money at. And also making sure, I must add on my voice in pushing back on closing Metro at 9 p.m. This will be devastating to working class families in my community who don't typically work a 9-to-5 job. We are a community of resilient people that travel across this region to work jobs to feed our families, from servers to bartenders to security guards, teachers, you name it. We have so many people in our community that depend on Metro, especially at night, and to make sure that they are doing what's necessary to survive in this city that's not affordable for any of us. So it is my hope that Metro goes back to the table and put the right investments that are necessary, putting equity at the forefront, and making sure that we are not eliminating the youth bus route in a Black thriving community as Deanwood. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Green. We'll now have our next caller.
Hello?
Hi,
Hello?
Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, this is ANC Commissioner Zachary Hoffman. I represent ANC 5D06. I would like to speak on the elimination of the D4 and D8 bus lines that are critical to the Trinidad neighborhood access to transportation resources. Eliminating these bus routes would be detrimental to our communities, as we do not have access to metro stations, and these buses actually are our way to access the metro. Many members of the community have made it very clear to me that they depend on these bus routes to get to work, to access medical resources at the hospitals that they service, and just to get around the city. We absolutely do not want to see these bus routes eliminated, and we need to not consistently propose cutting bus routes that only service areas that don't have any other means of transportation. This was these bus routes were proposed to be eliminated the last go around in the budget, and thankfully they were not. We also need to address closing the metro at 9 p.m. That is absolutely not something that bar and restaurant workers need to get to and from work, especially when we are bars and restaurants can be open until midnight. And in Trinidad, we have a high proportion of bar and restaurant workers and people that work in the hospital, the Washington Hospital Center. So I ask WMATA to please not eliminate those bus routes and to keep the Metro open past 9 p.m. And hopefully we can get to a point where Metro runs 24/7, which I know most residents would agree with is a good plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hoffman. We'll now have our next speaker. Hi, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, my name is Lucan. Oh,
Go ahead, please introduce yourself.
hi, my name is Lucan Jacob, and I am a DC resident and a member of Sunrise DC. When I first came to DC, public transportation was one of the first things I noticed. The subways and buses are reliable, clean, and are critical to residents' abilities to earn a living, receive an education, and travel safely. But I'm deeply troubled by the proposed cuts to Metro and bus service for several reasons. Service cuts that are purely informed by demand levels overlook real differences in need for public transportation. WMATA must consider not only how many people are using their services, but also whether riders have alternative options. Given the proposed budget cuts, it's clear that WMATA has not done its due diligence. If these cuts are made, thousands of Black, Latino, elderly, disabled, and low-income residents, many of whom are the most consistent users of public transportation in the DMV, will be without any service and left stranded with few alternate means of transportation. Promises and mission statements of, quote, equity, reliability, and affordability ring hollow when WMATA's proposed service changes are on the table. These cuts to service are fundamentally racist and will harm the groups of people that DC claims to serve, many of whom are also essential workers who've continued to work on the front lines throughout the pandemic. WMATA's proposed cuts are not only callous, but also incredibly short-sighted. DC's divestment in transit or from transit will bring us longer wait times, even less reliability, and a continued decline in service. Since the current operating budget largely depends on passenger fares, further service cuts could be a death blow to our bus and metro systems. Budget cuts will significantly reduce ridership and revenue, leaving WMATA in an even more difficult position. Cuts will also encourage the use of personal vehicles, taxis, ride sharing, et cetera, which are not available to many residents who currently rely on WMATA services, and will significantly raise costs for anyone else who wishes to travel within the area. We cannot tolerate these changes. Lastly, with the looming climate crisis and ever-widening levels of inequality, the DMV and WMATA are at a crossroads, and the path we take will have long-term consequences. We have roughly a decade to cut DC's emissions in half, and it's clear that investment in affordable, clean, convenient public transportation must be part of the solution. When we cut our bus lines, eliminate our metro stations, we're cutting our lifeline to a more livable future for everyone. We must protect our public transit at all costs and invest in a greener, more equitable future. I urge WMATA to reconsider its proposed cuts to essential services. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. Next speaker.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Tyrell Holcomb, Commissioner for 7F01 and the Chairperson of ANC 7F, which includes the Minnesota Avenue Metro Station. I'm concerned about the impact WMATA's proposed budget cuts will have on our community. As a native Washingtonian, I learned how to navigate the city by my family's use of public transportation when I was young. I know firsthand the U4, U5, U6 bus routes are the means of transportation for many of our families, seniors, school-aged young people, and let's not forget our essential workers who depend on public transportation. While the U5, U6 route will be replaced by the U7, there are immediate safety concerns had by community members and anticipated longer commute times. Furthermore, the U4 route will eliminate bus service to residents in River Terrace and a large portion of Deanwood. These proposed service cuts will only create more transportation inequity here in Ward 7. Additionally, WMATA closing at 9 p.m. will greatly impact our families, essential workers, hospitality, restaurant workers, local businesses, and ultimately our city's economy. And I can only imagine the negative impact it will have on future opportunities for growth here east of the river. While we recognize the budget constraints WMATA is facing due to ridership being down as a result of the pandemic, I can't help, as many of us can't help, but to believe that better days are ahead. Therefore, I urge you to not be hasty in making a decision that will only create further transportation inequity and create havoc for many of the folks here in Ward 7 who rely on public transportation. Additionally, many families in Ward 7 and 8 do not own vehicles and they solely depend on public transportation. So I ask that as you're making this decision, please don't leave out those that are the last, the least, or considered to be the lost. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your comments and feedback. Next speaker. Next speaker. Okay. Just as a reminder, for those of you wishing to provide testimony, you should call 512-580-8850. After calling in, you'll need to enter a 4-digit meeting code. For this evening, the meeting code is 3811. Once you're in the meeting, you'll be able to listen over the phone by pressing *1. If you'd like to provide testimony, you can provide *3 and you'll be put in the speaker's queue. You'll get a message when it is your turn to speak. I think we have our next speaker.
Hello?
Hi, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been trying to get in. I thought I was initially told I was a 12th speaker, so I've been a little confused. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name's Patience Singleton. I'm actually an advisory neighborhood commissioner representing single member district 4A04, and I'm the current chair of ANC 4A, which represents more than 16,000 residents in upper Northwest Washington. It's the neighborhoods of Brightwood, Colonial Village, Crestwood, North Portal Estates, 16th Street Heights, and Shepherd Park. Public bus transportation is important to the residents of my neighborhood, Brightwood, because the closest metro stations to my SMD are approximately 1.5 to 2.5 miles away. Many of my constituents depend on bus lines on a daily basis, some to commute to and from work, others rely on public transit as their sole means to navigate the city. I'm testifying today in opposition to proposed cuts to Metro bus service, specifically the elimination of the 59 limited bus that runs between Federal Triangle up the 14th Street corridor, passing through Brightwood and 16th Street Heights, and then moving over to Tacoma Park, as well as the cuts to the S1 bus, which starts in Brightwood and follows 16th Street downtown, across K Street over to Potomac Park. The buses along 14th Street, Georgia Avenue, and 16th Street are some of the heavily utilized and often overcrowded. Because of this, in 2017, I worked with other ANC commissioners and members of the general public to advocate for the addition of a limited stop bus line from downtown up 14th Street to Tacoma Park. I was delighted that Ramada announced the addition of the 59 limited bus route to begin operating in January 2018. Due to its less frequent stops, the route allows commuters along this priority corridor to get downtown DC faster using buses and further sort of improves transit accessibility in the district. It also provides additional capacity to relieve crowding on routes 52 and 54. I'm very disappointed that WMATA is now proposing to eliminate the limited stop 59 bus along a corridor that's desperately needed and in need of increased public transit capacity. It will disproportionately impact lower income, immigrants, the disabled, the elderly, and persons living farthest from a metro rail station. I can't stress enough that the northwest portion of Washington, given increased density and population, needs more, not fewer transportation options. Overcrowded buses and long wait times have been a fixture for the 14th and 16th Street buses, which pass through blocks of A and C4A. During rush hour, which often extends between 7 p.m., the buses are crowded and persons are not allowed to board because the buses have reached capacity at stops near Columbia Heights. Increased metro bus service and improved infrastructure is essential in a growing city to relieve congestion. For example, the development at the former Walter Reed Army Medical Center will soon bring thousands of new residents, workers, and shoppers, in addition to students who currently attend DCI school who utilize the 59 bus. The city must think about how to best accommodate this influx of people without flooding the streets with thousands of additional cars. Maintaining the 59 bus could be helpful in reducing congestion, addressing climate change, and ensuring the district's resiliency. In closing, I recognize that Ramada has to make a number of decisions to improve efficiencies and rein in the costs in the system, particularly in light of the revenue losses associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. However, it seems that the costs associated with eliminating important bus lines, including the 59 and 61, will be disproportionately borne by the elderly, lower income, disabled, and those individuals living farthest away from Metroline, and others with fewer resources such as immigrants. I urge Ramada to reconsider these cuts and develop a plan that is fairer and more equitable. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner. Next caller. If you're on the line, please hit star.
Good afternoon.
Oh, okay. Good afternoon. Good evening. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello?
Hi, can
you
you
hear me?
introduce yourself? Yes, I can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am John Higgins. I am a commissioner with the ANC 34G, representing Chevy Chase, Hawthorne, and Barnaby Woods. I want to thank WMATA for the opportunity to speak today with these brief remarks, and we ask that our full written testimony be included for the record. WMATA is proposing temporary curtailment of service on the E6 and M4 routes and permanent elimination of these routes in the spring of 2022. The position of our ANC is that these bus lines should be restored to their original full-service pre-pandemic status on a permanent basis. Our ANC and the DC Office of Planning are just now embarking on a small area plan designed to retain and enhance the vitality of our neighborhood for the long term. It is acknowledged that robust public transit will be a key element in achieving these goals, according to the DC Office of Planning report of April 2019. Both the M4 and the E6 bus routes support the communities affected by the ANC Small Area Plan. Under WMATA's proposal, students would lose bus access to Lafayette Elementary School. Some parents report they ride the E6 with their children to Lafayette and then continue by bus to the Friendship Metro. The principal at Lafayette has said, "We would definitely feel the E6 if it were missing." The E6 bus service is particularly important for seniors who live at the Knollwood Life Plan community on Oregon Avenue. Knollwood and other area residents rely on the E6 to get to the Chevy Chase Community Center, the public library, the Safeway, the CVS pharmacy, and medical services. This bus service is a lifeline for our seniors. Commuters in the neighborhood also use it to get to the metro. And DC frontline healthcare employees at senior facilities of Knollwood and Ingleside are among the critical users of both the M4 and the E6 public transit routes. WMATA is on the record for recognizing the importance of the M4 for students, which makes the proposal to eliminate the service at Woodrow Wilson and Alice Deal particularly questionable. The timetable published by WMATA shows 2 special student runs at Denley Circle at 3:20 p.m. and 3:25 p.m. daily, and terminating at Pinehurst Circle. The timetable notes that this trip operates only on days when public school is open. How can WMATA recognize the public school need and then propose to eliminate the service? Rather than being cut, student runs should be expanded to accommodate other school activities to help students get home. According to one resident, "When school is in session in the morning and the afternoon, my children have had to wait for at least 3 buses sometimes because the buses had no room to let them board. Meanwhile, the population is exploding. Deal had 800 students 10 years ago and now has 1,700, with forecasts of more than 2,000 in a few years." In the view of ANC 34G, it is almost incomprehensible that WMATA will propose elimination of both of these routes, and generally speaking, WMATA cannot shrink itself to prosperity. We urge WMATA to reconsider the proposed changes and restore full, original, and pre-pandemic service of the M4 and E6 public transit routes in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next speaker. Next speaker. Hi, can you introduce yourself? Can you hear me?
I have already spoken. I'm just listening at this point. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience. I know we have several more speakers on the line who are hoping to share their feedback, and we're looking forward to hearing it. Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Tiffany L. Brown, and I'm the ANC Commissioner of 7B02, and I'm the chair of ANC 7B, which is home to Hillcrest, Fairfax Village, DuPont Park, Twinings, Penn Branch, Randall Highlands, and Naylor Garden. I am here to inform you of what matters to my community. We oppose the changes proposed in the FY22 WMATA budget. ANC 7B is home to several bus lines. We do not have a metro station within our community. The closest rail service to our community is across the Sousa Bridge at Potomac Avenue, thereby making the metro bus a necessity for us. Based on the changes outlined, we oppose the elimination of service on the 30N, 30S, M6, and V7, as it will have an adverse effect on our community. Our area has many residents and students who either depend or prefer to use WMATA bus service or transportation. Our students will need reliable transportation for in-person learning or when school is fully open. Our seniors enjoy hopping on the bus to attend medical appointments or shopping. Removing our options and asking us to walk further to reach bus stops or to reach another bus will have an adverse effect on us. If residents who can are forced to drive because public transportation is no longer an option, this will have a negative effect on our carbon footprint, further contributing to our community's traffic congestion problem. Removing that access will leave our residents stranded. During this time, we need more access to public transportation, not less. Again, the community strongly opposes the elimination service on the 30N, 30S, M6, and B7. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next speaker. Thank you for all those who are still waiting to speak for your patience. Next speaker.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hello?
Can you introduce yourself?
My name is.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Can you introduce yourself?
Which is it? My turn?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. I heard another voice. My name is Rebecca Morris. I'm the commissioner of 7D06, which is the area, the Greenville Road area. I'm testifying to keep the U6 and the U5 bus stops, the U6 and U5 routes as is. I've been a rider of the U6 and the U5 for about 15 years. It has been a bus that has saved many lives in the Benton Park, Lincoln Heights area. Those are huge areas that contain citizens who work service jobs or work security, which can be night jobs. Having no bus around puts people at risk to get robbed, shot, or killed. We also have disabled and elderly populations who utilize those buses in those areas, as well as students. Taking away those buses and making them walk to Benner Road or East Capitol Street is just wrong. I just want you guys to keep the bus lines as is. And because that is one of the only ways that people can get to the grocery store as well in a large, which is the only grocery store in miles away. I would also like to see the train stay open in the late night. For many essential workers, Ubers and Lyft are expensive for those who live east of the river. Forcing people to pay $15 to $30 to get home would truly place families in a bind. If we want to move towards a carless city and want restaurants to go on a late night, to be a late night leisure, please consider them when they have no way to go home. I strongly suggest that we keep things open.
Thank you, Commissioner Morris. And it sounded like there was someone else on the line. Do you want to speak up, sir?
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity. My name is Carol Jones. I'm also calling on behalf to implore Metro to salvage the U5, U6 bus line. The U5, U6 bus goes to Lincoln Heights, Marshall Heights. There are several senior citizen buildings, only one grocery store in this neck of the woods, and it would be a hardship and a devastating event to eradicate the U5, U6 line. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. Next speaker.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Cortez Johnson calling from Fairfax Village over in Southeast Washington, D.C. in Ward 7. And I am for the opportunity to actually just voice some concern. Specific of my concern is in opposition to the proposed WMATA 2022 cuts, specifically for the M6 bus line that actually runs throughout the Pennsylvania Avenue corridor, in specific to Fairfax Village. I live in Fairfax Village. I've served in this community for 15 plus years, and I've grown up in this community as well. Removing that particular bus line, is completely detrimental to the residents, including myself in this community. We have elderly residents, we have kids that go to school, and we have a lot of people who actually, they do take public transportation. We don't have access to a lot of amenities, essentials basically, such as grocery stores, healthcare facilities, you name it, we probably don't have it. And so really just concerned about the proposed cuts. We should not be eliminating the M6 line, because that's essentially what would happen under this proposal. We had 2 bus routes before. In the last 10 years, the V5 LaFont Plaza to Fairfax Village, that was cut. The M2 Naylor Road to Fairfax Village was cut. So that's leaving us basically with a single point of failure, which is the M6, which now is proposed to be completely eliminated. So in any event, in closing, I just want to say that I think there's a better way to do this. And I'm glad that a lot of people are speaking out in opposition. I think that our voices collectively will be heard. And I really encourage WMATA to reconsider the cut of the M6 line, specifically for those people that are disadvantaged in this particular community. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback. Next speaker. Next speaker, if you want to introduce yourself. If you haven't already spoken and you'd like to be added to the speakers queue, please press *3 on your phone to be put in the speakers queue. Because we want to hear from you, we will wait until we can. I know there are a few other folks who are having a little bit of technical difficulties. Again, I want to remind you that if you're wishing to provide testimony tonight, please call 512-580-8850. Again, that's 512-580-8850. After calling in, you'll need to enter a 4-digit meeting code. For this evening's meeting code, the code is 3811. Again, that's 3811. Once you're in the meeting, you'll be able to listen over the phone by pressing *1. If you'd like to provide testimony, you can press *3 and you'll be put in the speaker's queue. You'll get a message when it is your turn to speak. For those of you on the line now, if you want to speak, go ahead and press *3 to get in the queue. Next speaker. Okay. Well, I'm being told that there's no one else in the speakers queue. I'm going to give one last call for testimony. Looks like one person has come through. If you haven't already spoken and would like to speak, please press *3 on your phone to be put in the speakers queue. Okay, well, if you'd like to provide oral testimony but aren't able to wait until you come up in the queue, you can press *2 to leave a voicemail. Your voicemail will be transcribed and included in the hearing record. In order for the public record to accurately reflect who's providing testimony, I'd ask that you just state your name and any organization you represent before your testimony.
Hello, this is Mo Pasternak. I'm the commissioner for DuPont Circle ANC 2B04. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Welcome, Commissioner. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we've had about an hour and 45 minutes of comments, and unsurprisingly, nobody has supported the cuts. A couple other speakers have noted the broad opposition, and that's really unsurprising. Part of my frustration is also that there's no understanding of what things cost. So obviously everybody's opposed to cuts, but it's unclear how much is saved by closing 22 stations, how much is closed by cutting the G2 service, eliminating the G2 service, how much is saved by various bus and rail cuts. So it's kind of tough to really provide any constructive feedback other than saying cuts are bad. But it is telling that, for example, eliminating the G2, WMATA says there's no alternative service available. So that's obviously a concern. And I just want to share that, if you're just going to look at where comments are heard as far as opposition to a bus cut, that's historically going to hurt underserved communities. So hopefully there's some other element, but because this is just sort of speaking into a black box, there's no way of knowing how this testimony is being factored into the decision. And I think it's also frustrating that there isn't really an update as far as what the budget situation looks like with the expected passage of federal relief. You're focusing on a lot of cuts and then say they might not even happen, but still just entirely unclear. And I hope that you provide updates and extend the public comment period once you can present a more realistic plan. And lastly, I'm especially disappointed that we're talking about all these cuts and you're still proposing a $36 million increase for the Metro Transit Police Department as opposed to providing more services to riders, which is the real mission of WMATA. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And just a reminder, since we're doing this hearing virtually, the hearing is going to look and feel different. We would normally have a presentation from our Chief Financial Officer, but in order to get to your comments and testimony, we have instead posted a video at wmata.com/budget that provides an overview of next year's proposed budgets. Also, this evening, I was able to share that in short, Metro is proposing to maintain operations and increase service to meet demands through December 2021, with the need for severe service reductions beginning in 2022 without additional federal funding. However, this weekend, the Senate did pass another COVID relief bill, and while the bill is still being approved by the House and hopefully will be signed by the President, it will take some time to calculate exactly how much funding Metro will receive. We're encouraged that a significant amount of relief for transit is expected to be included in the final bill. This will help us to minimize the service reductions in 2021. We will likely be able to avoid the worst of the service cuts that were on the table when we took this budget proposal out to the public. With that bit of good news, I still want to turn back to any speakers who are still on the line. Ultimately, this is an opportunity to hear from you. Your testimony will help inform our decision-making as a board.
Hello?
Yes. Can you introduce yourself?
One moment.
Okay. Hi, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello, how are you doing today? My name is Tommy S., and I'm a high school student and a Maryland resident. I'm not a representative for any town board or anything, but just a concerned citizen who would like to voice their opinion. Is that all right?
That is always okay. Go ahead, Tommy.
As a high school student, a sophomore in high school, I've grown up here in the DC, DMV area for my entire life. And the Metro's always been there for me as a form of transportation with family or just by myself. And it's a great feeling to know we have a system that can provide us, when we need to go places, multiple areas at once. And closing, in my opinion, closing them down at 9 o'clock would really interfere with a lot of schedules, not just young college students, but also with older adults and the elderly, because as stated before by some other people, it really does interfere with schedules. And those who work late night shifts up to into midnight or early morning can't get back due to the Metro being closed or some bus routes being closed. And to follow up to a comment I heard a man saying that it's good to close the stations. I feel I can understand closing some of them, but with closing them, I feel it really impacts our economy for the worse. And Metro, I feel, should be pushing forward and pushing to help the community by staying open longer and also helping their employees by paying them well and everyone being treated fairly. I think closing our system will just make our DMV area transit and everything in general worse and a lot more chaotic with spreading COVID and getting people not where they can't get. So they can't get to work, they can't get to everything on time, and it really will interfere with the community schedule, if that makes any sense. Thank you for your time. I really do respect what you guys are doing, and thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. It does make sense. I'll take our next speaker.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, this is Commissioner Kelvin Brown. I represent Single Member District 7B06, which includes the Hillcrest community as well as Fairfax Village and Ward 7 in the District of Columbia. And I'm happy to virtually be here today with you all, and equally happy that WMATA is holding these hearings to hear directly from local leaders who we interact with our residents, our constituents on a daily basis to improve their overall quality of life. As many have noted before me, access to affordable, safe, and reliable transportation is critical to all of our constituents who live, work, and play within my district and across the District of Columbia. Now, we know that without access to transportation, a person's state of well-being is impacted and communities decline. We must work together to ensure we safeguard access for residents regardless of their zip codes or financial status. And equitable access to transportation is a fundamental right that we cannot and must not be abridged. WMATA has a responsibility to ensure residents are not negatively impacted when decisions are made to cut bus routes. Profits and financials should not be the most heavily weighed factor in decision making. Studies have continued to show that lower income, seniors, people of color, disabled persons, persons without housing, and returning citizens are often impacted when access to transportation is limited. The lack of adequate transportation has a direct correlation to poor levels of health, lower levels of educational attainment, and the list goes on. So we're talking about transportation, but what we're really talking about today is our residents' future outcomes. In 2013, a review published in the Journal of Community Health found that 25% of lower income patients have missed or rescheduled their appointments due to lack of transportation. Those same patients also reported issues with transportation, also missed filling prescriptions, and were more than twice as often as patients with the same problem. These decisions have consequences that could lead to inadequate management of chronic illnesses, as well as poor health and overall life outcomes. It's our duty and responsibility to ensure those without a voice have a seat at the table to express their concerns and gain meaningful redress. As elected official for my single-member district, I implore WMATA to reconsider cutting the M6, the 30S, and 30N bus routes. If these routes are to be cut, it would have potential life and death impacts for so many residents within my district and across the district as a whole. Over the past few years, my district has seen several cuts to vital bus routes that have serviced our community. And as a result, these cuts, many residents have had to walk miles to transportation or rely heavily on relatives or pay exorbitant amounts of money to Uber and Lyft just to get to work or transport their child to school or get groceries and simply get medicine. And so, in my opinion, no one should be burdened or disconnected from resources because of inadequate transportation or lack thereof. These proposed cuts must be taken off the table and safeguarded because the lives of our residents, my neighbors, literally depend on it. So in my testimony, I've talked exclusively about inequity that exists with these and previous cuts, but there are many more negative impacts from cutting services. Instead, I believe WMATA should be working to expand services to underserved communities by working with new technologies to electrify buses and cut carbon emissions, working via collective bargaining agreements to ensure that none of our essential workers, bus drivers, et cetera, lose their jobs, medical benefits, or wages. Also, we should, instead of closing Metro at 9 p.m., we should extend it for workers who work late-hour shifts to make sure that everyone gets home in a safe and sound manner. And so in closing, I thank you for your time, also your consideration in this matter, and I'm relying upon WMATA to ensure resident voices are heard during this process and that profit does not dictate the final outcome of this conversation. We must
Commissioner? Okay.
Hello.
Hi. Before you start, Commissioner Brown, if you want to hit *3 again, we'll try to get you back in the queue, but thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, yes. My name is Tara Maxwell. I speak for several transportation and transit organizations in the Maryland, Virginia, and DC area.
Okay.
And I am thoroughly surprised that they are still talking cuts at this particular time when there has been a new bill in Congress that will be voted on Wednesday. Considering that most of the board of directors, including Mr. Smetberg, sits on committees in Virginia, D.C., and Maryland, they actually have more information than is being shared with the public at this particular time, as far as the budget shortfall and things of that nature. And instead of looking for alternative and innovative ways to cut other things other than operational cost, they're looking directly at operations cost when you still need more operations cost. Congressman Jerry Connolly has had a bill in Congress since before COVID that has not been voted on that actually covers transportation operations cost for WMATA. There are other bills, 2 other bills that have been in Congress before pre-pandemic, where they have not passed through Congress that can be utilized to cover some of the operational cost. So I am just really confused at this cut mentality, and the fact that most of the people that are actually on the board of directors sit on other committees and are chairs on other committees that understand what exactly is going on, yet they still ask for cuts. So I would like to see the 3% cap on growth, that is the responsibility of all 3 jurisdictions, be waived or suspended during the pandemic until a year after the pandemic. That is one way that they can minimize operational costs. There are several other ways that they could do this instead of just going toward ridership and affecting the most and the least of the communities in the Washington, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland areas. It is really appalling to me, the approach that is being taken, and I am happy to hear so many people that have called in to speak. Unfortunately, I don't think that's really going to make a difference. The numbers, $212 million budget gap, can be overcome if some of the ideas that I just suggested are put into play. And if someone comes up with other ideas instead of just cutting ridership services. It makes no sense. Please make it make sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maxwell. Next speaker. If you'd like to be placed in the speaker's queue, please hit *3. Hi. Hi, can you hear me? Hello?
Hello.
Hi.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
Hi. I can hear you.
Okay.
Hi. My name is Kimberly Nichols, and I live off the Morgan Boulevard stop. So I'm just a regular old citizen.
And that's who we want to hear.
I'm here. And I'm here to actually complain about 3 stops that I think are being unfairly targeted because of because of the pandemic. So my stop is Morgan Boulevard Station. Already, we're not serviced by Metrobus. And you can see the impact of that because we have Six Flags America in close to us. We have FedEx Field. We have Jump. We have Dave and Buster and many more coming attractions at our stop. But you have to see all these workers walking from Morgan Boulevard Station all the way, like half a mile or a mile over to where they work, just because there's no Metro bus on our stop. Also, there are tons of people who live in the area who work in DC. So taking the stop away would quite honestly stop lots of people from getting to their job. We are more valuable than the low ridership that you have right now, simply because there's a pandemic going on. Second, Mount Vernon Square is also the convention center stop. Closing that would close off, it would close off access to all those great conventions that use the stop, things like Otakon and AwesomeCon USA and the USA Science and Technology Fair that invite crowds and crowds of people and that spend in the local economy at that stop. So that stop is still very valuable, even though right now there's a pandemic going on and those events cannot happen. The last one is the Smithsonian Station, which I can't even believe is on the list. The Smithsonian was a gift from a man called John Smithson, and he believed in giving information to all the classes by making that education free. There are 19 institutions in the Smithsonian that give information to everyone. And we know that because buses and busloads of people crowd the Metro just to get off at the Smithsonian. However, the Smithsonian is closed right now due to the pandemic. These three stations offer a lot to the economy, and it's unfair to cut them off.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Nichols. Appreciate your comment and feedback. Next speaker. And just a reminder.
Hello?
Yes.
My
Can you
name
introduce-
is Leslie Cummings.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Ms. Cummings, go ahead.
I am a federal worker who lives in the state of Maryland, and I don't have my own transportation. I have been taking public transportation since I came to live in Maryland back in 1979. It has not always been easy to get around, but I've come to love the DC metropolitan area so much that I have taken any means of public transportation I could just to be a part of this great and wonderful city. I was fortunate to get a federal position, and when I moved to a place in Maryland, I found there was no buses, no train station. I was spending up to $60 round trip every day for 2 years to get myself back and forth to work in Washington, D.C. Now that you guys have these wonderful buses and trains, and it's close to 40 years since I've been working for the government, every time you make an improvement, it's for the better. However, I'm very disappointed that the improvements that you claim to be making in these proposed budget cuts for all of the rail stations and bus stations in the DC metropolitan area are sadly a step backwards and not a step forward. We are all suffering through this pandemic, and some are fortunate to work from home, and some are very essential and must be at their jobs. And whatever you guys were thinking when you decided to cut these services is not really helping to ease the pain and suffering and loss of unnecessary lives due to this pandemic. I implore you, as an American citizen and as a faithful public transportation rider, to please reconsider your options, listen to our citizens, hear the voice of the people, and do what needs to be done. If you can reach people, we can reach people at the federal level, the state level, the local level. We can write to our congressmen and senators. We can write to our aldermen, councilmen, county executives, whoever we need to reach. We as a people need to go ahead and put out a huge petition, sign it and send it to WADMA along with our written testimonies. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Everybody have a blessed night.
Thank you, Mrs. Cummings. Next speaker. Please press *3 to be added to the speaker queue. Hi, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, Joe Sternlieb. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, I'm Joe Sternlieb. I'm the CEO and president of the Georgetown Business Improvement District, testifying on behalf of the organization today. The Georgetown bid understands that the proposed fiscal 2022 Metro bus cuts and changes are budget-driven, given WMATA's obligation to present a balanced budget and its funding and ridership uncertainty. However, the cuts to Georgetown service area will have disproportionately negative impacts on our commercial district, the university, and the hospital, and its ability to recover from the pandemic. We pledge to support the efforts to get sufficient pandemic relief funding from the federal and regional governments to ensure these cuts do not occur, and we very much want to work with WMATA to ensure that these cuts do not occur. Georgetown is the largest employment center in the District of Columbia that is not served by Metro Rail. It is not on the city's grid and has very limited roadway access in and out of the neighborhood. We are extremely dependent on Metrobus to get our employees, shoppers, and visitors to the neighborhood. We simply don't have the roadway capacity to accommodate thousands of employees if they can't take the bus. Just as a point of reference, we have about 23,500 employees who work in Georgetown with no access to direct access to a metro station. Specifically, a large number of Georgetown bid area employees, especially hourly workers with limited transportation options, use the 30N, 30S, and 38B to access their jobs. Just outside the bid, the university and hospital are heavily dependent on the D2, D6, and G2 buses. The elimination of all these routes in the third quarter, notwithstanding some limited increases in the 31 and 33 buses, will force people into 2- and 3-seat rides that will extend commute times beyond reasonability. This burden will fall disproportionately on lower wage earners and people of color. Georgetown's recovery strategy is focused on increasing sidewalk widths, removing parking, and heavily marketing Metrobus as the preferred way to get to the neighborhood. The proposed bus service cuts will undercut this effort to the detriment of both Georgetown and WMATA, limiting the labor pool for employers and negatively impacting our ability to recover. We urge the WMATA board and regional jurisdictions to come together to ensure that bus service to Georgetown, as well as to other neighborhoods that depend on it, is not eliminated in such a draconian fashion, and we stand ready to work with you on both funding and operational solutions to ensure that Georgetown remains accessible by Metrobus. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your feedback. Next speaker. please press *3 if you'd like to be added to the speakers queue.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you.
Oh, great. So my name is Delia Househill, and I'm the Vice Chair of Advisory Neighborhood Commission 7E. My single member district is 7E06, and it's in the heart of Marshall Heights and is bound by the Capitol View, Benton Park neighborhoods. Residents primarily rely on the U5 and U6, W4, 96, and V8 bus lines, as well as the Benton Road Metro. First, I want to thank board members of WMATA for making the commitment to conduct hearings about the fiscal year 2022 proposed Metro bus and rail service changes. While I understand the significant budgetary constraints imposed by reduced ridership, I am strongly opposed to the proposals which will dramatically reduce our community's access to valuable public transportation. Our area has many residents who either depend on or prefer to use bus and rail service as their primary mode of transportation. Reducing and/or eliminating access to bus and rail service will significantly reduce access to grocery stores, schools, critical health care, jobs, and other daily necessities. Further, asking residents to walk further to reach a bus stop will increase their travel times, and for many disabled residents and students, make access nearly impossible. By cutting and/or modifying service, you give people no choice but to use cars, further increasing our carbon footprint and contributing to our community's traffic congestion problems. According to WMATA's Equity in Transit Initiative, Metro is committed to providing equitable transportation because the communities we serve are stronger when everyone has access to reliable and affordable transportation. Unfortunately, the proposed budget cuts are not consistent with WMATA's statement on equity, and in fact, the proposed cuts will exacerbate inequities in transportation as Wards 7 and 8 bears a disproportionate burden of the proposed service reductions and modifications. While we understand that adjustments must be made to reflect budget concerns, these adjustments must not be made on the expense of the city's most vulnerable populations. While I am encouraged to hear that additional federal resources will be made available to WMATA, I hope that this also translates to WMATA rolling back the massive cuts that were originally proposed, specifically the changes and cuts proposed to the U5, U6, W4, 96, and V8 bus lines, as many residents depend on these routes to access jobs, healthcare, schools, grocery stores, and other amenities. Again, we implore WMATA to reconsider these massive cuts to rail and bus services that impact the residents of Ward 7. Lastly, while I'm grateful for this forum, the outreach by WMATA to the advisory neighborhood commissions and surrounding communities was grossly inadequate. For example, notice was just recently sent to commissioners on February 24th, and there has been no communication or explanation of potential impacts to bus routes and rail service. Additionally, many commissioners and residents first learned about the proposed reduction in service when flyers were handed out at the metro stations. While the public comment closes, given that public comment closes on March 16th, this has really given ANCs fewer than 30 days of notice to gather feedback from constituents, raise awareness, and coordinate a response. As elected officials, we welcome and encourage ongoing and continuous engagement with WMATA, particularly around issues that have a significant impact on residents' access to critical transit services. Again, thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next speaker.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening. My name is Anna Jane Tabler, and I represent myself. I am a resident of Arlington, Virginia, moving into the district in a few weeks. I'm echoing a lot of Yes, thank you. I'll go ahead. I'm echoing a lot of sentiments of equity, accessibility, and mobility that many concerned citizens, ANC commissioners have echoed this evening. But I just wanted to point out a few examples on the survey that WMATA has put out about closing specific rail stations and how that might affect communities who rely on metro accessibility. So, for example, if Federal Center Southwest or Federal Triangle, Mount Vernon Square were to close, there are other options for pedestrian walking. But if East Falls Church was to close, There isn't an accessible way to access the metro in any other form. The closest one is either West Falls Church, which is 2.4 miles away, or Ballston, which is 2.8 miles away. And a lot of people have mentioned that mobility is defined as a 0.5 mile walk to a metro station. So I'm urging Metro to view their budget cuts through, a mobility and equitable lens. So many people are moving out of DC as the rent prices are increasing. And so, closing these neighborhood stations without any real solution to what we're doing with closing these stations is just not an adequate solution right now. So I'm grateful for this opportunity and appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback and your patience. I'm being told that there is no one else in the speaker queue. I'm going to give one last call for testimony. If you haven't already spoken and would like to, please press *3 on your phone to be put in the speaker's queue. Okay. Well, that was our last speaker. This hearing is now concluded. Testimony can still be submitted online or via US mail as long as it's received by Metro by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard on Monday, March 16. Thank you again for joining us and for taking the time to provide testimony. We look forward to incorporating and hearing your feedback as we make our decisions as a Metro board. Have a good night.